Hi, friends. This is Will Parker. Before I jump into this week's episode, a conversation with Jen Schwanke about what to do when you feel restless, I want to give a couple of heads up for Principal Matters listeners. First of all, with the publication of my new book, Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, I've had several opportunities to present to not just school leaders, but also school-wide faculty on the practices that they can be increasing in their own self-reflection, their own self-care, so that they can continue to be inspired in the work that they do with their students and their families and then their communities. If you are interested in connecting with me about the possibility of presenting to your staff, I have limited dates available going into the summer and fall semester. So please feel free to reach out by email at will@williamdparker.com. The second thing I want to put on your radar is that summer, which is just around the corner, is a great time to reconnect with professional development and learning. And the mastermind communities that I have been leading this year have been some of the most helpful ways for school leaders to consistently connect with other leaders in their own growth. And usually, as I wrap up a semester in the spring and summer, I begin to open up new opportunities. So if you're interested in a mastermind opportunity going into the summer, and as you look at the fall semester, again, just reach out to me. I would love to connect you with an application and swing around and have a conversation with you either by phone or Zoom to see if that would be a great fit for your own personal and professional growth. Again, thanks for doing what matters, and I'm looking forward to sharing this week's episode with you. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 236. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're talking about questions when you feel restless with my co-host, Jen Schwanke. Jen Schwanke is the principal of Indian Run Elementary in Dublin, Ohio, and the author of two great books for principals that you can find at ASCD or at Amazon. Jen Schwanke, it's so great to see you again. And I understand that you, like, I'm going to say millions of educators across the U.S. and the world, just got your vaccination. Congratulations.
Yes, I did. Yesterday was the second round. And so the process is complete for me. Where I live, there's been a really wonderful and admirable effort to get all educators vaccinated. And it feels like a gift. You and I were talking a little bit off air. It's a real gift that we're making sure our educators are vaccinated so that our kids can get back to school.
Yes. And how do you feel?
It's funny. I spent yesterday, the way our district did it is there's a 3-day window where people got vaccinated. And we actually went remote for those 3 days, we're in hybrid now, but it was again, a gift because everyone reacted differently. And I spent those 3 days hearing horror stories of people that were knocked flat, but mostly just people feeling tired. And that's definitely what I have. Just a little fatigue, but nothing that a couple Tylenols and a chai tea latte can't fix.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting my own. Next
Yes.
week is my first round. And because I office in a school, I get that option too. So
Nice.
I'm so grateful for the amazing minds of scientists and people around the world that pull together so quickly to come up with a vaccine that has such a high rate of success. I mean, it's really profound.
Well, and I think most educators I've talked to have really been awash with gratitude, like you just said, not the scientists and the forward thinking and the distribution of this. And then where we got ours, it's a huge field house in a neighboring high school, and all the nurses that are there giving the shots and the pharmacists checking you in and overseeing the process, and the fire department and the police department there to make sure that nobody has adverse reactions. It really is a great example of our world coming together to get over this thing. And I'm honored to be a human being in that world. It's a time to be grateful for sure.
It is. It has been an unbelievable, I don't even know how many months now. I mean, I want to say a year, but it's been more than a year now that educators have been walking through. I mean, for most people, it was around spring break of last year that the reality really set in. And as they have adjusted and led, and kind of the highs of the beginnings of COVID, when school teachers and health workers were all heroes, and then the downside when the normal year began here in the U.S., and then schools became the places of conflict as everyone was fighting over what's the best options. And then as school has progressed and you've been in and out in quarantining, and some schools are just now beginning to return in person. Um, what a crazy year, Jen.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
as I talk to principals, there's just such an array of emotions. Some
right.
who feel just enormous gratitude, others who are just exhausted
Yeah, yeah.
with decision fatigue, and so I think the range of emotions is as varied as what we've seen happening around the world with the pandemic.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think it's okay to have a huge range. And for me, I had a really bad day last week and I called my friend Jacqueline. She's a principal in a neighboring building. And I said, my God, what's wrong with me? And she said, nothing, nothing, honey. It's okay to feel so high and so low and then so grateful and then so angry. And that's, I think the key is just accepting the range. And it's creeping a lot of people out that for many of us, in my district at least, we are going to go back to full return, we're calling it, almost exactly to the day that we went remote. And you can think about a year in your life in a lot of different ways. You can put it in a box, well, that was strange. Or you can put it in a box where you're going to pull out lessons from it. You can put it in a box and put a lid on it and never ever think of it again. But I think it's an opportunity, particularly for educators, to think about what we've learned. Alongside COVID was many natural disasters near where you live. There was such a winter storm last week that I think you have a friend who's going to have a hard time getting up and running again. And but you mentioned some positives that came out of COVID for her. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, but
Yeah,
it's a
I mean,
point.
and
My point, of course, is that there's a lot of good that came out of this very interesting year.
yeah, and yes, one of my good friends who is a member of our mastermind leads a school in Texas and in outside the Houston area, and two of the three buildings on her campus were destroyed through frozen pipes that busted, and the restorations are going to take between 3 to 6 months. And so, the upside is that she and her teachers know how to teach remotely because of COVID. The downside is that parents are demanding to be back as soon as possible, and so which she can't control restorations. And so, on top of the angst and the anxiety of having led through a difficult year, and now there's this whole other layer. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with a principal who was just reflecting. This is her fifth year as an administrator in her district, and every single year she's been there, there's been some either natural disaster or something that's happened that has closed school early. And so, and I was just thinking about, you know, we think this is outside the norm, for us to face these kinds of crazy things that create school-wide crisis or school-wide havoc or school-wide difficulties. Sometimes I'm wondering if it is the norm, and we just don't recognize it because we're so good at pivoting. We're so good at being flexible. We're so good at being relentless, that sometimes we don't realize that. Like you said earlier, when you called your friend, she said, no, actually, Jen, this is normal. It's actually normal to consistently face crazy obstacles, to feel overwhelmed, to feel like you're not doing your best, and then to just pause, breathe, reflect, and then
Right.
recalibrate.
Right. And I think that, we, as principals, as leaders, we're supposed to be the strong one. Always. We're the strong one. And we look at our people and we look at what they're struggling with and we think, okay, what's the solution? And often, at least for me, I'm not a crier. I don't get emotional necessarily about work things. But when you add layers like your own children struggling or people that you're worried about dealing with other issues, then you start to maybe get emotional and you're not even quite sure what you're crying about. You're just so tired, right? And so I think that permission to feel and permission to have the highs and have the lows is perfectly okay. And I want to land a little bit with your friend who had to go remote for a bit. We did as well when our district went into the vaccination mode. And so I think we have been given a gift of this option of remote learning, but I also feel that many administrators are anxious about this because although it's a great way to change our learning mode temporarily when crisis calls for it, we're also very, very well aware of what those parents think. It is disruptive to parents. And I had this thought last week. Many administrators work with a union, some sort of a collective bargaining unit, and we answer to that unit, right? Well, I feel like in the past year, many parents, because of social media, have begun to feel like a different union. Because for my, speaking again for myself, I'm always aware that a parent can get on Facebook and say anything they want to say. And then there could be all these comments, which, again, with the analogy of a union, those are voting members, right? They all get a say. And so I think with compassion about principals who may have to make a hard decision about going remote or about changing a learning mode, because there are going to be so many opinions. And when those opinions come together in agreement, it can feel like one against hundreds. And that carries with it a really heavy weight for our principal friends. And I don't know the solution to that other than to be strong and make decisions that are right for students and for teachers and for the general school population. But it's something to acknowledge that we're contending with going forward.
Yes. And I think that's such a good reminder that every decision that you make, there's always the potential that someone will be disappointed or push back, but then trying to keep in mind that ultimately your job is not to make everyone happy. Your job is to do what's best for kids in the situation and then live with the consequences. But it's, another conversation I had recently with another leader who works a lot with principals is he said something, and I wish that listeners could see my hands, because he said, I feel like when I'm working with principals now and he was bringing his hands closer and closer together. He said, I feel like the person who can actually flourish and thrive in the principalship is getting narrower and narrower.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that's true or if the pressures on all principals and leaders and teachers in particular are just getting bigger and bigger. Maybe it's just because of the pronounced pressure of what COVID has brought. That could be it. But I think it's undeniable that the pressures on school leadership, it seems, get larger and larger each year. They don't in any way seem to be lessened. But I also know that if I back up and talk to principals, you and I have been doing this long enough that I can still remember having these same conversations 20 years ago. So it's not new, but it's certainly, I think, amplified by our access to voice. So social media or mobile phones or the ability for people to communicate quickly. It does, I think, increase the pace of pressure that people are often feeling.
Yes, that's the component. I agree with you, Will, and I'm glad you said that because the difference is the voice. There's so many voices. I had a fifth grader joke with me last week. I mentioned something about my boss, and he said, "How many bosses do you have?" And I said, "We're going to need a calculator for that." Because I'm not quite sure I can do that math in my head. So there are many, many more voices holding us accountable. But you're so correct in saying that it's always been hard. There's a wonderful book out there. It's called The Principal's Office by Kate Rouse-Manier, and she covers the history of the principal's office. It's a wonderful book for anybody out there should read this book, because there's always crisis and there's always angst and social upheaval and those things that have been going on for centuries. And so, to think about ourselves in this moment in time, it always feels unique, right? It feels like nobody else has ever dealt with that before. And that's certainly the truth. But principals have had enormous pressure on them for a long time, navigating through Brown versus Board of Education, navigating through the student rights movements, navigating through massive amounts of urban change and upheaval and suburban growth. All of those things have been pressures on administrators for countless years.
Mm-hmm. Well, this may be the longest introduction that you and I have ever done to a podcast, because as we were sitting down to discuss this week's focus on, what I do when I'm feeling restless, we had been getting feedback from one of the recent podcast episodes that we did on interviews or openings or job opportunities. And so we wanted to circle back because we've had some feedback that I thought would be really helpful for us to talk about. So while we're on that topic of feeling restless in the context of one of our listeners, I just want to give some feedback. And I did not ask this person for permission to use her name, so I'm just going to just reflect a little bit, Jen, on this email that you and I received. But this principal, who is in the Virginia area, says that the recent episode that we did really resonated with her. And I'm just going to read the quote. I really thought that the principalship would be my last stop before retirement, but I'm getting restless. I'm not sure if it's because the principal role has turned out not to be the dream job that I thought it would be. It is difficult to tell during a pandemic. This is my third year as the principal in my building and my eighth year in the same building. I loved every day as an assistant principal, but I'm just not feeling the same joy now. Listening to you and Jen has really made me focus my search and consider where I can add value in my current district and surrounding districts. It did make me laugh when Jen told about her story about applying for the HR position. I feel the same way about interviewing, and I almost submitted my name for an HR vacancy. And I realized after listening to you that HR would not be a good fit for me. So, Jen, I think my first question from that listener's feedback is, what do you do when you're feeling restless in your work?
I'm so glad this listener wrote to us, because I think there's a couple of things that I would like to unpack from her comments, and I know you do too, Will. First, I think it might be a mistake, and hear me out here. I feel like it might be a mistake to search for joy when searching for a job, because this job and most jobs are not joyful all the time. There's absolutely moments of joy for sure, but there's a lot of people out there, especially again on social media, that say how much joy they find in their work. But I don't know if that is if that's truly something that's sustainable all the time long term. I think we have to look for fit, and we have to look for what fills us up, and then the joy comes, right? The joy doesn't come until you feel comfortable in your own space, in your own time with what you're doing. And so when the listener said that, she acknowledged it was difficult to tell during the pandemic, and I would say that's what we have now. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and so there's hardly anybody feeling joy. Maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe the word that we should search for here is fit. And I want to unpack a little bit too when she's feeling restless. I feel like when you're not feeling a good fit, of course there's no joy there, but then you have to kind of search for where the hole is. Where's the water coming out of the sieve? And it might be any number of things. She might be bored. Is she restless because she's bored? Is she restless because she feels she's not able to do good work? Restless because her supervisor doesn't appreciate or respect her? Colleagues she's tired of? To hone that down and to really identify the source of the restlessness will help her find her answer. And sometimes it might be leaving that current role. She said she loved being assistant principal, and so that's maybe she needs to say, okay, I'm not in the right fit now. That's why there's no joy. And I'm not saying this person should demote herself, but it's a possibility. Or looking for a different role that might fit her soul a little bit better than the one she's in right now. I would caution this listener and any listener, don't make big, huge moves right now. We are in the middle of this time that none of us have ever experienced before. And to say, I'm not feeling happy, I'm going to do an about face with my career is probably not wise. You've got to give us some time to get through this as an industry, as a group of educators, so that we can see what really is tripping us up. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Will, what you do when you're restless or not feeling right about things.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair for me to reflect as if I can relate, not being in the principalship right now. But I will say these things, Jen. Um, I think you're right. It is a dangerous time to be making decisions based on how you feel about the moment that we're living in. I'll give you an example. Last night I was visiting with one of my college daughters who'd stopped by the house, and we were both just reflecting on our week. What's something that brought us joy? What's something that was a challenge? What's something we're looking forward to? And I'm feeling pretty consistently the same because I'm doing the same so much right now. And so, um, if you were to ask me, am I getting a lot of joy in the work that I'm doing? The answer many days would be no,
Exactly.
because I'm limited on my access to people. The work that I do when I moved out of the principalship meant that I spent most of my time traveling or visiting schools or working with leaders, and virtual was the exception, not the rule. And now it's become the rule, not the exception. And so I love the opportunities that I have to connect with people, like what we're doing right now. I love the opportunities to train and get on a screen and talk to people across the U.S. But I am just aching for human connection right now. Even though I office in a school, it's still not my responsibility to lead that school. So I think it would be really dangerous for me right now personally to say, well, I'm aching for these changes, therefore I just need to make a change. I think that would be short-sighted, because what we're experiencing right now, like it or not, even though it seems like it's been forever, is temporary. There will be, we are going to transition back at some point. And if you look at the rapid, um, the vaccinations, if you look at an overall herd immunity that's eventually coming. I was just reading a really great article in the New York Times this week that just said, fast forward, and at some point, COVID will be like the flu used to be for us. We'll vaccinate every year. We'll go to school. We'll go to work. It's never going to disappear, but we're going to learn to live with this and see. We're going to see a lot fewer people dying because of this disease if things work out like they normally do with scientific discovery and vaccination. So just to rewind to that question, I think that sometimes it's hard to keep restlessness in perspective, but I think it's really important to keep it in perspective right now.
Another component to this is our teachers are feeling this too, Will. I had a teacher 2 weeks ago, and he said to me, I just don't feel joy. And I felt exactly the same as I do as a mother when my kids say, I don't want to vacuum. Well, of course you don't. Who does, right? And I kind of said that to the teacher. I was able to put my mom hat on. I said that. I said, I'm going to mother you for a minute. He's very young, so I'm allowed to say that. I said, there's not joy every moment. And what I think you're missing is, the frolicking students out at recess and assemblies and parties and those things that we think of as joyful. Are they gone? Absolutely. But there is joy in other places. And I said to him, listen, the way that we in our district are providing education, we would have given our left arm for that 10 years ago. We have small class sizes. We're seeing every one of them half of a day. So we are, in a lot of ways, we have the flexibility and additional resources. Oh my goodness, the technology we now have, that would have been something that without the cloud of COVID, this would seem like magic. So there's joy in that too. There really is a different kind of joy. And I challenged him to find that joy, because nothing about his job has changed. In when you get right down to it, he's still teaching. He's still working with little human beings. He still has the gift to guide and mentor them. And so, in some ways, I think, without being too harsh, we can have an inner conversation with ourselves and say, I'm not joyful in the ways that I used to be, but is there joy that I can uncover? I have a friend, and he left the principalship last year to take a different job. And he said, when I left, I had this little twinge where I thought, am I making a big mistake? And he says to me now, yes, he said, the principalship was the best job I ever had and that I will ever had. He knows that now. And it took the rearview mirror to show him that, right? So sometimes it's not till later that we know where the joy was. I recognize and acknowledge that. But I do think there's value in committing to finding it,
Hmm.
whatever it looks like.
That's so good. And, Jen, I'll give listeners just a small taste of what's coming in the weeks ahead. I've been reaching out to listeners who have been corresponding with me. Several of our listeners are from outside the U.S. And so I've been really curious what this experience has been for them, because I've been talking to principals here close to me and across the U.S. about their experiences. So I have a series of interviews that are coming up in the next few weeks with principals from outside the U.S. who have been sharing with me their COVID experiences. But one of the questions that I like to ask in those conversations is, what are they doing for their own self-care, or what are they doing? And it's been really eye-opening how much we have in common. And it's been such a good reminder. And I know that we often sound like, I tell people I often sound like the grandpa giving it, advice. So forgive me for being the grandpa, but I'll give you another story. I was in a conversation with a younger friend of mine, and several weeks ago, and we were just walking through some of the restlessness that he's feeling, and we had a really good conversation about it. But this is a relationship that's a conversation that's been going on long enough that I just said to him, I'm going to be really direct with you, because you're asking for feedback. And I just looked back at my calendar and realized this is the 10th week that we've had the same conversation. And every week when I've asked you about your own self-care, there's one thing consistently that you've stopped doing. And he said, what is it? And I said, for the last 10, this is a friend of mine who loves to run. And it was the 10th week. He'd not done any exercising. And I said, I don't know how you're surviving at all without that physical outlet that brings you so much joy and relief normally. And he was just like, it's like that light bulb, that moment of there are some things that we can do, small things. And for some of you, running may not be a small thing, but think back. And this is what I always have to remind myself when I'm going through a crisis or a restless moment, or I'm feeling like I'm about to pull my hair out. I stop and say, what are the things I normally do that help me recalibrate? So maybe that is turning off everything and reflecting, or reading, or prayer, or maybe it's just taking my dog out for a long run or walk, or maybe it is just turning off technology and playing music for a while. But whatever those patterns are that help me recalibrate, I can't stop doing those when things are getting harder. I have to continue to do those, because that makes a difference too. I mean, there's sometimes when I'm feeling really restless, and something like a really good workout, or maybe a nap, will recalibrate me and help me kind of refocus too. So I think it's important to keep those practices in mind too, because like you said earlier, Jen, you certainly don't want to make life-altering decisions in a time like this, when some of those small practices can help in the meantime, while we're all waiting to get back to what may or may not be normal again.
Right. I'm going to give a professional development to a group next Saturday. And when I talk to the leaders, I said, what do your people need to hear? And she said, they need permission to take care of themselves. And I thought, well, goodness, I'm going to talk for 90 minutes about giving them permission to take care of themselves, when really it's a simple concept. And I think you nailed it. Find what it is that you do to take care of yourself in a non-COVID year, and see if you've let that go, and maybe invite that back into your life, and see if that helps you feel a little more grounded. I think it's important to give ourselves a hot second to get everything back to normal after this thing we've been through.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, I don't know if that conversation helped you today, but I know it helped me. And Jen, I just appreciate the opportunity to step in a room and ask that question. What do you do when you're feeling restless? And especially as we step into the spring, and I know we have more questions from listeners that I would love to unpack with you in a future episode. But for now, I just want to remind Principal Matters listeners that as whatever season you're facing right now, maybe you're not feeling restless, maybe this has been a great day for you, but maybe you are. But whatever that is, it's important for leaders to practice the same self-care when they're feeling restless that they would want their people to experience too. And we will get through this. That we're going to look back someday. I've thought about this whole year of podcast episodes, how someday this whole year of episodes will be so dated, where people someone's going to find this podcast episode. They're like, what? They just talk about COVID all the time. That's all they ever talked about. And so someday this will all be perspective.
Or somebody will write a history book about us. That would be fun.
Well, until next time, Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
You can find other free resources like this one at williamdparker.com.